What do television shows like Daniel Tiger, augmentative and alternative communication devices, read and write for Google Chrome, and watching YouTube videos have in common? They can all be used to support communication. My guest today is going to talk about how technology can be used to help very young children and even teenagers develop their language and communication skills. My guest today is Rachel Madel. She's a speech-language pathologist based in Los Angeles, California, and she is dedicated to coaching parents and professionals on how to incorporate technology to best support speech and language development. She also co-hosts a weekly podcast called Talking with Tech, and I am so excited that she is here with me today.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I am thrilled that you are here as well. You know, one of the things I said when I reached out to you is that I have wanted to have you on the podcast since I thought about starting a podcast. And you were one of the inspirations for me starting it because you have your own podcast.
Yeah, well, you've been on my podcast. So
Yes,
it just feels like full circle here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you were doing well and it's good to see you. And, you know, especially at a time when we're not seeing a lot of people these days still.
I know. Thank God for technology. So we're still able to see people without actually physically seeing people.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just like, I think about that all the time. Like, thank goodness that we're in a place and time where we have technology. Because otherwise, like, I don't know, the world would look very different.
It really would. And it's a great segue to our conversation because that's the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast, because you do so much work with technology as it relates to working with kids who think and learn differently. And, you know, especially now, you're probably seeing an explosion of parents and educators wanting to kind of use technology in a way that enhances learning, you know, which we've over the last 2 years have been trying to figure out how to do. And hopefully we're better than we were 2 years ago at doing it, but we'll see, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm super passionate I've always been like really interested in technology. I've always been like an early adopter of all things technology. And, you know, clinically, it's just been such a game changer for the way that I work with students. And, you know, without the technologies that we have today, my students and learners would not be able to learn how to communicate the way that they do. And there's just so many different tools that you can use. And I think one thing we've seen in the last 2 years is people's comfort level with technology has changed. The work that I did was a lot harder 2 years ago before people had familiarity with a lot of the tools that we're now using for online learning. And now it just feels a lot easier a segue to have those conversations, to introduce new technology, because there's just this like baseline comfort level now that everyone was forced to get with online, you know, learning and also the technology that goes along with it.
Absolutely. And it feels like people are more ready and more willing to kind of accept the use of this technology. But it also makes you wonder, what did we do before? Right?
Yeah.
How did we facilitate this learning before?
Yeah, we were kind of stuck in a lot of ways. And I think that it's really interesting to see how technology can really change the learning atmosphere. And also it really can help the students that struggle. And I work a lot with kids who have struggles with reading and writing and communicating in general. And it's just like, there's so many cool things out there that you can introduce. And kids are really excited when you actually give them a tool that is able to help them learn, or help them write or help them formulate their ideas. And I'm just really always geek out on like how like new tools that are out there and how I can use existing tools in different ways. So I just, get really excited about it. And that's what, you know, my podcast is about. And a lot of the work that I do online, a lot of the training that I do with other clinicians, circles around how can we use technology to help support learning and communication.
Right. And, I know I did the introduction of you before we actually started, but you are a speech and language pathologist. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the kids you serve?
Yeah. So it's interesting because a lot of times when I'm on the phone call with a, new family, I have a private practice in LA. I'm talking about lots of different technologies. So I feel like the umbrella thing that kind of puts like my practice or separates it maybe from other practices is the technology piece. So that could be anywhere from a child who, has very significant needs communication wise. I do a lot of work with augmentative alternative communication, which is basically a fancy acronym for any type of technology that can help support communication or augment communication. So some children have the ability to speak verbally, but their speech isn't understood. They have significant issues. Maybe they have apraxia of speech or some type of diagnosis that makes their speech clarity really impaired. So we can use AAC for that. I also use it for children who aren't showing any signs of communication with verbal speech. So there's lots of different ways that I use AAC in my practice, and also assistive technology in general. So assistive technology is kind of this umbrella term that AAC falls under. But how can we use tools that can help assist students in the learning process? And so I also work with a variety of students who are struggling with reading and writing, and using tools like text to speech is a big one that I use in my practice. Figuring out how we can support kids in other modalities to support their learning, making things super visual for some kids who are visual learners, things like that. So it's kind of a broad variety, but I'm always interested in using technology, even just to find things that are motivating for kids. I also get excited about new apps and things that we can use digitally to help, give kids things to talk about and things they want to talk about. So there's lots of different ways that I pull in technology into my practice. Those are kind of the big ones.
Right. And, I often refer a lot of the kids I see to speech and language pathologists like you. And oftentimes when parents are coming to see me and I'm reviewing the history of some of those kids, I see there's been a delay in speaking, either in using single words or expressing a complete thought. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about when it's appropriate to kind of seek out a speech language pathologist like yourself. And when would you recommend using kind of the visual supports that you've described to help kids with delays? Because oftentimes parents feel like it's a crutch and it'll keep them from speaking.
Totally. Yes. I'm happy you brought that up because that's definitely something that I face all the time in my practice. So when we're thinking about when should we incorporate visual supports, the reality is it never hurts. It never hurts to introduce visual supports alongside of what we're doing and, the input kids are receiving auditorily. So, I am a big believer in supporting, students visually, with visual supports very early on. Early intervention is a great place to start using some of these visual supports. When it comes to actually more, high tech, devices and things like that, again, we know from research that doesn't actually hinder a child's ability to learn how to speak verbally, because that's oftentimes a big fear. It's like, I don't want my child to use a device to communicate. I want them to learn how to speak. That's why I'm taking them to a speech language pathologist. But we know that actually when we give kids the technology and the tools to, communicate their ideas in their head, not only does it decrease frustration, which a lot of the students that I work with, you can only go so long without being able to communicate your thoughts and ideas and your needs without then getting really frustrated that someone's not understanding. So it's typically by the time kids get to me, it's like they've already been not communicating for quite a bit of time. They have severe, frustration because they're not being understood. That translates into temper tantrums and all these kind of maladaptive behaviors that go along with not being able to communicate what you need and what you think. And so, getting started before that, by pairing simple visual supports, even using, a sign language as a way to help give other modalities of communication, because we kind of get focused on speech. And that makes sense because, babies who are learning how to communicate, that's what they start doing. They first start babbling, and then they start, using words and word approximations, and that turns into sentences. And so, that's kind of the typical trajectory. But there's lots of work that we can do supporting nonverbal communication, gestural communication, and these are all visual modalities. So if a child's not, necessarily picking up the auditory only modality, I'm always thinking, how can I incorporate visual supports into that? So, there's no like set age necessarily, but, I'll say this, especially when we're thinking about young children, children who are birthed to 3 years old, that's like early intervention. If a child is not learning new words pretty consistently each week and practicing new words, and, you don't see that, that tells me that's like a warning sign. Like, okay, that's not just a late talker. Because late talkers with the right intervention will start communicating. It might not be, totally intelligible. So we might not understand everything they're saying, but they should be learning and using new words each week with the appropriate intervention. So if I'm not seeing that, some warning signs go off to me like, okay, I need to start doing something else. I need to incorporate some visual supports. I need to start maybe thinking about AAC. I always, when I'm training clinicians, I always talk about not using the word AAC specifically when you're thinking about having these conversations with parents, because, parents are very like, what is AAC? They start Googling it and then they get really anxious. Like, no. Like I came to you, Rachel, to teach them how to talk, not to use this device. And it becomes very scary. And so really easy, shift is just thinking about visual supports. How can I take something and make it visual? And that could be as simple as a choice board with all of your child's favorite snacks. Having the ability to point to the snack that you want and learning how to point to that snack. That can be really simple. Technically it's AAC. We'll call it a visual support, but that can really help a child who doesn't have consistent access. And it's always about access for kids. It's because sometimes I hear things like, oh, well, he can say it sometimes. He's just lazy, right? If he could say it consistently, he would,
Right.
It's like,
it's not laziness.
It's not laziness. Kids don't want to like throw themselves on the ground and have a tantrum because they're not being understood. If it was easy for them to say verbally consistently, they would. And so it's really about access, consistent access to verbal speech. And we know, especially, autistic students, they don't always have consistent access to verbal speech. Some of my favorite podcast episodes on my podcast, Talking with Tech, we have AAC users actually come on the podcast and talk about their experience. And we've had 2 AAC users who are part-time AAC users, meaning sometimes they have access to verbal speech and that's what they use primarily, but there's moments in time where they don't have access to verbal speech and they need to use some type of augmentative or alternative communication system to communicate what they want to say. And so, I think that's a perfect example of how, we hear from autistic adults, I don't have consistent access to verbal speech. And so I like to kind of share that because I feel like sometimes it appears like kids have, great access to verbal speech, but then other times they don't. And for those other times they don't, it's really important to have some type of backup system, backup modality of communication that's universally understood and allows, individuals and children to be able to communicate what they need to communicate.
Absolutely. And I love that you talked about it in terms of really supporting and facilitating communication, and not replacing communication. And that's really important, I think, for parents to know that we're still working on developing communication. But then it's also, like you were saying, it's consistency with their ability to express themselves that may be the issue and not just a lack of the ability to speak completely. And what I'm also hearing from you is that language is so much more than just forming words. And even when we think about kids entering preschool, we talked about, or you mentioned, and I mentioned kind of early intervention. There's so much language that is required when a child gets to the point where they're entering preschool, not only in terms of being able to follow instructions and directions, but to also express and articulate their needs.
Yeah. And that's the thing that, when especially parents think about speech therapy, they think about speech, what's really just articulation or speech clarity, right? Like my mouth can form certain sounds that go into words and I'm understood, my message is conveyed. But there's this whole other section of communication that's language, right? It's the ability to understand the language that I'm hearing. So understanding things like concepts, like, does your child understand how to put something in and then take it out and open something and close something? That's being able to understand that language. And then expressive language is how do they actually form words and answer questions? And there's so many different skills associated with language. And so the problem is if you have a child who's struggling with the speech part, they can't consistently access the speech or their speech is really hard to understand, then, we're missing all these opportunities to build language skills without the right technology. A child has the ability with the right technology to learn how to ask a question, how to answer a question, how to use words that their mouth can't formulate at this point. And sometimes it's just a matter of catching up. Like a child, for example, with apraxia of speech, we know that with the right intervention, their speech will clear up. The motor planning for speech will be improved over time with the right supports and intervention. But if we wait until that process happens to then start working on language, they're so far behind. And so I'm so passionate about early AAC and early technology and visual supports because I hate to see these kids fall so far behind on the language because that's something that we know we can keep building in different modalities like AAC, so that when kids' speech does catch up, they're not so far behind on the language front. They know how to answer questions. They know how to ask questions. They know how to put words together in meaningful ways to communicate different messages. Without the ability to have something else other than the access to verbal speech, which we know is inconsistent, then we don't have a lot else to do. And kids just fall further and further behind. Which is just so problematic. And, me as a clinician, I'm like, I know that you're nervous about AAC, but trust me, we need to build these language skills because by the time their speech does clear up, they're just going to be so far behind.
Right. And being behind, like you were saying initially, creates frustration for the child. And then you see a lot of these behavioral issues. And sometimes those kids are sent to psychologists for behavioral issues when in fact there's a language-based difficulty that's underlying some of those behaviors that the teachers or parents are seeing at home or at school, which again speaks to the reason to really address these issues early on. And then also to take advantage of neuroplasticity when kids are really young, the brain's ability to rewire and to strengthen those pathways that are weaker in those kids.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point, Karen, which is so many kids, they appear just behavioral kids, they're not listening in the classroom. And so I come into a situation like that and I start actually assessing what's happening. And it's not that the child doesn't want to listen or follow the routine. It's that there's a language-based learning issue and they don't understand the language. And if we have a child who's in a preschool classroom and the teacher's saying, okay, put your backpacks over, by the door and go sit down, and they don't understand, they can't process that language, then yeah, of course they're going to see a shiny object, go get distracted, and then they look like they're not listening. And it's a behavioral issue when in fact it's really just a language-based learning issue. And so it's really important to, if you have a child who is struggling in a classroom, having the proper assessment to see what are their language skills? Are there gaps in understanding? And sometimes kids can really fly under the radar there. And it's actually really fascinating to me how they can fly under the radar for so long.
I know it.
Using compensatory strategies. And it's really impressive actually that they're able to see the kids around them, follow what the other kids are doing, but there really is a language learning, challenge for them. And I can come in as a speech language pathologist and I'm like, okay, here are the gaps. They don't understand what before and after mean. So of course they're not understanding before you do this, then do this. It's something as simple as that, which can really change, an entire, trajectory for a student. diagnosing an underlying language disorder. And that's happened so often. And I know you refer a lot of clients to me because of that issue. I love, all the reports you do, Karen, are so thorough and so wonderful because you really take a look at all these different pieces, and it can really fly under the radar. And it's really crazy that it appears like the child doesn't, want to pay attention, or they don't like school and all these things. And it's really just like they need help.
They absolutely need help. And I love the example you gave about the kids, not understanding the instructions. I can see how that also, and I've seen it in some kids, creates anxiety because you're sitting there, you're doing your work, and all of a sudden all the kids get up and are moving, and you're just like, whoa, what happened? Where are people going? Is there an emergency? What should I be doing? Did I not hear something? And not only do you see frustration, but this can create a lot of anxiety in kids.
Totally.
Who may then eventually, want to avoid school because it makes them nervous.
Absolutely. And it's like, that's why I'm so passionate about teaching kids the compensatory strategies they need in order to be successful. So for this, fictitious example we're using here, we need to teach that child how to ask for a repetition. Like, hey, and they can do that with a peer. Hey, what did the teacher just say? I missed it. Because a lot of our kids, they're not auditorily strong. There's auditory processing things going on. And, our speech, it's fleeting. It's ephemeral. It doesn't last. It leaves someone's mouth. And if you didn't catch it, then, you're stuck looking around wondering what's happening. And so a lot of the work that I do with students is teaching them, oh, it looks like you didn't remember what I said, or you didn't hear what I said the first time. You need to ask me, can you say it again? And so it's like strategies like that, we really need to teach our learners who aren't able to, catch things the first time. They have, some learning differences that make the auditory processing challenging, especially in a noisy classroom. Something as simple as that can make a huge difference. And all of a sudden they're able to advocate for what they need in the classroom. They're able to ask for repetitions when they need it. They're able to say, I don't know. It's another one that I work on with my students because it's like, oh, they can't answer questions because they just like blank stare when I ask them a question. It's like, well, then no one's ever taught them to say like, I don't know. Right? It's something as simple as that. And it's like the moment you teach that skill, sometimes it overgeneralizes and kids are just like, I don't know. They're like, oh, this gets me out of it. This gets me the answer. Right. But at least they have the skills to be able to say, I'm not sure. And so things like that, not only are good skills to work on, but I will have visual supports of those strategies on cards on a desk that remind a child when I don't know, I can ask for help. I can ask someone to say it again. I can say, I don't know. It's like, that's an example of how a visual support can cue a student to think, what could I do right now? I'm struggling. I'm looking around the classroom. I don't know what's happening. Oh, that's right. I can do these things. And so that's kind of the power of visual supports in general. And then, we can geek out on like how to upgrade it with the tech, right? Like there's tons of tools and tech things that we can do, in a similar vein. But something as simple as that can be a game changer.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking that self-advocacy piece that you've mentioned, it's small, but it's so important. And I can see how that, and I've seen it, decrease the frustration, increase the awareness of what it is that you're supposed to do, and increase the understanding. And there's relief because now I know that I can ask for what it is that I need, which again facilitates that language development. And then also I can do what I'm supposed to do, which is empowering for so many kids.
Yeah. The other thing that I like to think about too is we can model these situations to the students that we're working with. So, I want to teach a child how to say, I don't know, but I also want to model a situation where I can say, you know what? I don't know. Because it normalizes their experience, because so often kids just feel like, well, I'm the only one who doesn't know. I'm the only one who has to ask someone to say it again, right? And so, as educators, we can really make sure that we're weaving those types of experiences into the work that we do so that it doesn't make a student feel like I'm the only one who's not sure, or I'm the only one who has to use this type of approach. The same way it is with our feelings. I'm always talking with families about how can we support children using language around their feelings, talking about their feelings, because oftentimes before behaviors, there's tons of feelings involved, and feelings take a long time to learn. Like, what is that sensation in my body? And how do I attach a word like frustrated to that? It takes a lot of experience, but it also takes a child seeing, their parents and their teacher have these emotions too, because again, it normalizes the experience. And it also helps to teach. Like, it helps a student to see someone else frustrated and communicate that. And so I'm always thinking about how can I weave these experiences into the work that I do with students to really illustrate the kind of concepts that I'm working on with them.
Right. So in addition to the technology piece, there's modeling, and there's also, again, helping kids to develop those self-advocacy skills. And, when I think about technology, and we've been talking about how we can use technology to enhance communication skills, I really think it's important to let parents know we're not talking about giving kids an iPad and then just saying, see you later. Right?
Yes, that's not what we're talking about.
Describing a lot of interaction with parents and with adults, with kids, even when they're using the technology. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. So I'm happy you brought that up because no, I'm not advocating just put some type of device in front of a child and walk away. So yeah, there's definitely strategic ways that we can use technology to support communication. And there's a few strategies that I love to share with, especially with parents, but even other SLPs, educators. So we know that kids are really motivated by technology. Like most kids, their favorite time of day is screen time. Like, oh, I get to play this game or watch this video. And so we can use that to our advantage. The one kind of rule is when it's my device, like I get to decide what happens to it. And especially if I'm working with a young student, I'm the one in charge of the device. And so that really helps because typically kids' experiences with technology is, oh, someone put something in front of me and I get to just like tap, tap, tap away and do whatever I want on it. Kids are not interested in talking about what they're doing when they're engaged with actually tapping and seeing all the things, all those fun things that happen on a screen. So kind of the first step is just, being in control of the technology. If you're doing something like watching a video, I love to watch videos on mute. So if I take the audio away, we can watch the video and we can talk about it because there's not all of this kind of extraneous noise, music, dialogue. Now, sometimes I want those things for older students. I want them to hear the dialogue and then I'll pause the video as a way to take a breath, talk about what's happening, predict what's going to happen next. I love using videos to help students learn inferential thinking and how to predict based on what we see on the screen. This is why I love telepractice so much. I've been doing obviously a lot of telepractice in the last couple of years, and I'll pause the video and I'll say, what do you think is going to happen next? And, if a student's struggling, I'll say, let's find some clues in the picture. If it's like a scene where I literally just did this with Daniel Tiger, Daniel Tiger's mom's putting on the bathtub, Daniel Tiger's standing right next to it. And I'm like, what do you think is going to happen next? And the student could not figure out what's going to happen next. So I'm like, okay, let's find some clues. Ooh, I'm circling with annotate features on, Zoom. Like, oh, here's the water. The water in the bathtub's on. That seems like it could be a clue. Oh, look, here's Daniel. It looks like he's holding a towel. That's another clue. It's like things like this where we're able to kind of slow down the process. And the reality is when we're using technology to help support communication, to help expand communication, to get kids talking and formulating their thoughts and ideas, we need to slow down the process because if we're using a video, if we're using an app that, we're engaging with, it can all happen really quickly and it can detract from the experience of connecting and communicating with each other. So being really cognizant of how you're using those tools, I think is really important. And sometimes for students too, another trick that I'll use is you can change on YouTube the playback speed. And so especially in 2022, these clips of these cartoons and, really motivating shows, they are so fast. The dialogue's fast. They're doing fast cuts. It's like, even us as adults, we have the experience of watching a movie from 15 years ago. And I'm like, I'm so bored. And it's because
so slow.
It's so slow. And we're so used to this cut, that cut. It's constantly cutting to all these different scenes, and we're like so overstimulated by that, and that becomes our norm. The same thing is happening with, shows and things like that students are watching. And so you can actually change the playback speed to 0.75. And that actually can make a huge difference in, just slowing down the process to allow our learners with different needs who need, extra time to process what's happening, to think about what's happening. And then I'm constantly rewinding, playing again. That repetition can be really helpful too. But there's so many ways that you can use a child's most favorite thing, and you can get them communicating about it. You can teach these skills through something that's super motivating, instead of just finding these flashcards and these things that kids are another worksheet. We can use technology to our advantage in, really strategic ways and get, a better outcome, because kids are engaged in the process. They're excited about thinking about, what's Daniel Tiger going to do next? I don't know. Let's find out,
And that engagement is such an important piece. When you're thinking about wanting kids to learn and wanting these skills to develop. And I know you do a lot of work with kids who are minimally verbal and emergent communicators, but a lot of the tools that you're describing can be learned to teach much more than just language development. It's like impulse control. And you talked about inference and turn taking and developing literacy skills. So it's not just for the younger kids.
No, there's so many different ways that you can use technology with older students. And I love using videos for perspective taking. So I'm working with older students on social pragmatic skills and perspective taking and, the nuances of, intonation, and we're slowing down a video, and I'm really kind of breaking it apart to teach those inferential thinking skills. Well, he's saying this thing, but he's saying it in a way that seems angry. Does he sound angry or happy right now? And really breaking down the process, and again, doing it in a way that's really motivating for kids. And I have a lot of students, especially autistic students, who they understand the rules of social, interaction, because they've had therapy for years and everyone's been teaching them all these rules. But there's still a breakdown in actually understanding the why behind it. So a lot of the students that I'm working with who are older, who we're working on inferential thinking and perspective taking, it's there's a sign on the door. I'm just thinking about experiences of my own therapy, but there's a sign on the door that says open. And I'm like, is this store opened or closed? And the student says open. I'm like, how do you know? You think that would be a really simple question to answer. There's a sign that says open, but
right.
These students struggle, and I'm circling the sign, and I'm like, how do you know? And they're just not getting it. Obviously, with enough teaching and repetition, they start getting it. But it's that's a perfect example of how, that's the disconnect with our students with social pragmatic challenges. They don't understand how they know what they know. And if we don't understand how we know that, how do we come to that conclusion? We have a really hard time down the line with being able to demonstrate that knowledge with reading comprehension and writing and all of these things. And so it's those types of skills really set a foundation. And again, using things that are motivating for students. I love using animated shorts. Actually, I should send you, Karen, I have a whole playlist of animated shorts on my YouTube channel. There's probably 60 or 70. The reason I love animated shorts is because there's typically not any dialogue. And so you have to rely on the clues in the video and facial expressions and all of the things that are happening in order to understand the story. So you can use this with older students who are working on, higher level language skills. But you also can use it with emergent communicators. You're just working on verbs. You're like, what's he doing? Oh, he's running. Oh, he's walking. He's swimming now. It's so versatile. And again, super engaging for students to watch a video. It doesn't feel like therapy anymore. It's oh my gosh, I get to go see Miss Rachel and watch my favorite videos. This doesn't feel like work. And it shouldn't. Communication shouldn't feel like work. We can find things as educators that engage students in, really motivating ways and also really organic ways that actually help impact their life in a positive way. So having a student be able to understand the favorite show that they watch every day and start cluing into the dialogue of that show, like that's a really functional thing, so that when they leave my session, they start understanding what's happening in their favorite show instead of just watching it and not really understanding, the plot or the dialogue or, all of these things that we're working on together. So I feel like we can get really strategic.
And those videos seem to be able to help kids also pay attention to those nonverbal cues, which is part of communication. So it's not just what people are saying, like you talked about. It's about how they're saying it. What are their physical gestures? Are they rolling their eyes when they say it? Are they looking away? Are they looking at their watch? Those kinds of nonverbal cues. It helps them to pick up on those as well, which is such an important part of communication.
Yeah. And it's just, again, it slows down the process. I'm able to pause a video, circle something on the screen or point to it, versus in an actual situation, like our students aren't able to kind of dissect exactly what happened because an eye roll happens so quickly, and our students miss it. But when I can start teaching, like, look, what happened right there? Let's rewind it and watch it again. We slow down the process and all of a sudden it starts making sense to our students. And now all of a sudden that student's looking for someone to roll their eyes and they catch it and they're like, I learned about this. This means that they're not being serious. Their words are not matching with their body language and their communication that they're communicating nonverbally. So it's like, those are the types of skills that we can slow down, teach, and then better equip our students in the real world when they encounter these things.
Do you have any favorite speech therapy apps? I know you probably do.
Oh my gosh, there's so many.
I can't even ask you for like a top 3, top 2. I guess it depends on, where the child is struggling in terms of their language development.
Yes.
What aspect?
Okay. Yes. And it also depends, like, are we talking about like things I use to motivate students to communicate? Or are we talking about tools that I feel like are really helpful for students? I love, and this isn't necessarily an iPad app, but I love Google Read and Write. I use that with so many students. It's a text to speech. It's free. And it basically helps students if they're writing, for example. It gives it reads aloud what they're writing. So as they're writing, they're able to hear it back. And that can make a huge difference. You also can have a student write a paragraph and then highlight the entire paragraph and they listen to it back. For students who are struggling with dyslexia, they start catching, oh, like that's not what I meant to say, or I didn't spell that right. I spelled a different word. And so those types of tools are a game changer. I use text to speech I'll be like doing my dishes or something and I'll be listening back to my reports that I write. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right, and that's just like a time-saving hack that I use. But it's like we all can use these tools. Same thing. There's another Google Chrome extension called Grammarly. I am obsessed with Grammarly.
I use it all the time.
Well, you know what's crazy, Karen? I feel like I'm using like a Google Doc, and Google Doc's not catching some of the issues.
Absolutely. I find that all the time. Yes.
Yeah. So it's just, Grammarly is so nice because anything on Google Chrome, it will start kind of scouring for grammatical errors, spelling errors, things like that. And again, this is an assistive technology tool that I use, and our students can benefit from too. So those are some like really great tools that I love using in my practice. As far as motivating things, there's this one app. It's called Pepi Wonder World. And so it's basically this like magic world, and you have to there's different islands on this world and you have to pay for each one. And I bought all of them because I'm obsessed with it. I don't know, I've probably spent $20 on the app. But I have so many kids, literally all of my kids are like, I call it the dragon game. Can we play the dragon game? And the reason I don't tell them what it's named, because I don't want them to tell their parents, I want Pepi Wonder World. And then by the time they get to my session, they're not excited about it because they've played it for like 20 hours. So I specifically don't call apps their name on purpose.
So I won't put it in the show notes.
Exactly. Exactly. Because I'm just like, no. And they're like, and sometimes kids will come back to me and they'll say my mom couldn't find the dragon game. And I'm like, good.
That's the point.
Exactly. But anyway, the reason I love Pepi Wonder World is because, again, it's one of those super versatile apps that can be used with emerging communicators, and it also can be used with older students. There's a lot of really cool inferential thinking that you could do with that app. It's kind of like there's lots of characters, there's lots of opportunities to describe. A child can't simply say like, oh, I want the girl, because there's like 10 girls. They all have different color hair, outfits. It's like, oh, you want the girl with purple polka dots? Oh, we can pick that girl. So there's lots of ways that you can use to help students formulate and be more specific with their language, because a lot of the students that I work with, they have very non-specific language. They're like, that one, this, the girl. And I'm like, which girl? And so we're working on skills like that. It also has a lot of opportunities to problem solve. And so, I'll just kind of play dumb and be like, there's this really cool treasure chest, but I can't open it. Like, what do I do? And like it gets kids thinking like, well, like, and at first I was like, oh, wow, a treasure chest. And they'll be like, open it. And I'll be like, I'm touching it, but it's not working. Like I'm just like totally playing dumb. And then they're like, well, maybe there's a magic word. And it's like really interesting to hear how kids can start solving these problems. Maybe there's a key. Where do you think the key might be? Really helping kids problem solving, predicting, like, what do you think is going to happen when I put this key in? What are we going to find? So there's lots of language opportunities. And then there's also in a few of them, there's like this one machine, and you put a vegetable into it and something comes out. So it basically cooks it. So I'm like, okay, we're going to put a potato in. Like, what do you think is going to come out? And they're like, oh, some kids are like, a potato. And I'm like, what kind of a potato? Like really getting them to think through their process, and it comes out and it's like French fries. Oh my gosh, yes, that makes sense. Potatoes are made, or French fries are made from potatoes. What about a carrot? What's going to happen? And just like that predicting piece in real time in a way that's really fun and engaging. So yeah, Pepi Wonder World, it's like, I've literally been using it for years, and I'm just waiting for kids to get sick of it. And they don't. They ask for it every time. And what's also cool is they keep updating the app. So it's like they made like a Santa's workshop now for the holidays. And it's like, we can like, build a present. And there's just really cool interactions available. And again, super great for young students and also older students, depending on what skills you're working on.
Wonderful. Rachel, you have just given our listeners such great information about how to support language and cognitive skills, I feel, and how to use technology to further develop communication skills. And I just thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise with us, with our listeners. And if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
So the best place to find me is my website, rachelmadel.com. I have, contact information there. If you're interested in working together, I have courses that I have resources. There's so many things on my website. So I'd say that's probably the best place. I also have our podcast, Talking with Tech. And every week, Chris Bouguet, he's my co-host on the podcast. We kind of do a deep dive. So I'd say that those two places, that website's talkingwithtech.org. If you're interested in kind of a podcast, I'm always thinking about how can we like change the different modalities that we present content in. And, I feel like podcasts are a great way to do that. And then, the other way is just social media. I'm really active on Instagram at Rachel Madel SLP. Also have a Facebook. So, with all those different ways, you'll be able to find a way to connect with me. And, I'm really always eager to connect with new clinicians and new educators and parents. I just really am passionate about sharing what I know about technology and giving people ideas on how to incorporate it into the work that we do. Because I think it can be so motivating. And, for some of our kids, it's life-changing. Without the technology, they wouldn't be able to connect and communicate with the world. So I love technology. I just love it.
Thank you so much for being here. And we will be sure to link your website and your podcast in the show notes for sure. Thank you again. This has been so great.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.